For years, the city of Tacoma has remembered a gruesome story. A young girl vanished while riding her bike in the park and was never found. Her disappearance dominated conversations among the locals from the start. The whole community was on edge, as similar mysterious disappearances had happened before. But the town never solved the mystery for 3 decades. Recently, detectives solved the mystery, and what they discovered shocked everyone. Jennifer Bastian was born in Chicago on April 15, 1973. From the beginning, the girl had everything a child could want: parents who loved her and a big sister to whom she was very close. One day, her family chose to begin a fresh start and relocate to Tacoma, a city close to Seattle. Jennifer has loved sports since she was young. She loved playing soccer and practicing gymnastics. She always strived for excellence in these sports. However, Jennifer was not limited to just that. Playing the piano also had a special place in her life. Jennifer's parents were always supportive of her aspirations. When her father gifted her a new bike at age 13, she did not just ride around the city streets on it. Jennifer decided to aim higher, becoming a successful cyclist. When she learned about an upcoming cycling event on San Juan Island, she decided to participate. This was a serious competition that needed a lot of effort and dedication. The location of San Juan Island, near the Canadian border, added a special charm to the event. Jennifer started to train hard. Almost every day she rode her bike for over 6 miles. Her friend joined her in the challenge and they trained together, helping each other achieve their objective. The girl lived near a big park that had an 8-kilometer circular road. She and her friend would practice there on Mondays. August 4, 1986 was a frightening day for Jennifer. She spent the morning with her mother, but after lunch, her mom went to work the evening shift. Jennifer had planned to go to the park with a friend, but her friend canceled at the last minute because of some essential business. Despite being alone, Jennifer decided to go to the park for her exercise routine. She asked her father for permission to go alone. Her dad agreed, but with the strict requirement to be back by 7:30 p.m. Jennifer left a note for her mom and departed around 3:30 p.m. However, when her dad got home about 8:30 p.m., he discovered that his daughter had vanished. He scoured the entire house and peered outside, expecting to find her bike in the garage, but Jennifer was gone. In despair, he phoned his wife, who hastily rushed home. They immediately contacted the police and a large search for Jennifer began. The officers searched every corner of the park, despite its vast size and dense woods. With night approaching, the search became even harder and more puzzling. Police officers worked hard in the area where Jennifer was supposed to have driven on an 8-mile road. Local volunteers quickly joined the search as everyone in the park area knew each other and were willing to help. Officers canvassed park visitors, urged anyone who might have witnessed Jennifer to report to them, and located the first witnesses relatively quickly. 3 boys who attended the girls' school reported seeing her driving through the ring road around 4:10 p.m. They mentioned the presence of a man on a bicycle in the area and provided a brief description of him. However, Tacoma Park is frequently visited by bicyclists, joggers, and other recreation enthusiasts, so the police are hesitant to draw conclusions about the man's potential role in Jennifer's disappearance. A few more people came forward to say they saw Jennifer near the park around 3:00 in the afternoon. Jennifer stopped there to refill her water bottle and take off her helmet. These people even talked to her for a bit, and Jennifer shared her plans for an upcoming cycling competition. Sadly, their search for Jennifer was unsuccessful until late in the evening, and they still haven't found any clues about her whereabouts. The courageous officers searched the park throughout the night but repeatedly came up empty-handed. A thick fog covered the scene as nightfall approached. The police came to her mother's house and advised her to wait for her daughter. They brought dogs trained to find missing persons and requested some of the girl's possessions to help the dogs detect her scent. Thus, the police officers decided to close the park to the public for the next 3 days. This ensures that they can carry out detailed investigations in the area without any hindrances. Several hundred volunteers stepped up to assist the officers, indicating how eager the community is in finding Jennifer. But there was a scarier part to the story than one would think. A few months ago, in a different park, another girl had died under strange circumstances. This caused the residents of the peaceful town to speculate about a serial killer being present. It was March 26th of that year, only 5 months before Jennifer went missing, when 12-year-old Michaela Welch visited Puget Park with her younger siblings. All 3 girls had piano lessons coming up in just a few hours. Michaela wanted to ask her mother at work if they could spend some time playing in the park. Michaela has always been remarkably self-sufficient despite her young age. She had been responsible for looking after her younger sisters since she was a child, while their mom was at her job. Their mother trusted them and permitted them to go to the park for a while. The three sisters went to the park, without knowing that they could also be involved in this eerie mystery. Michaela and one of her sisters rode bicycles while the third girl rode a skateboard. They realized they forgot to bring a snack with them, and they had to go to class after the ride. No one wanted to go hungry, so Michaela decided to run home and make something to eat while her sisters stayed in the playground. There were many kids and grown-ups in the area, so the older sister wasn't concerned about their well-being, especially since they lived only a short bike ride away. While Michaela was at home, her siblings needed to use the restroom, as there were no public restrooms in the park. They walked to a coffee shop across the street from the park. When they came back around 1:15 p.m., they spotted the meal that Michaela had made on the table along with her bike next to it. But the girl was missing. The sisters searched and called her name, but Michaela did not appear. The sisters were frightened, and they sought help from adults. The police were contacted, and they started searching the park while asking witnesses for information. One witness, a 13-year-old, reported seeing a doubtful man hanging around under the bridge near the park and following Michaela and her sisters. The boy gave a basic description of the man, from which a draft was made. Another person who saw what happened was a man who worked at the school where the girl who was harmed attended. Fate brought him to the scene when he was passing by a nearby park. He saw little Michaela talking to an unfamiliar person, which made him anxious. He bravely shared his observation with the police officers, and everyone was surprised by what he said. The way he described the stranger completely contradicted what the 13-year-old had told them. They thought they were looking for different people, even down to how they dressed. The investigation was muddled by rumors, but the officers persisted in their all-day search until they finally found the girl's body in a part of the park that was overgrown. This was the grim end to a night that started with mild fear. The body was in a deep hole that seemed to have been used for a fire at some point in the past. The cops looked straight at her neck and saw that it had multiple stab wounds. Her body was covered in scrapes too, and it was clear the girl had been through immense pain. Later on, medical professionals confirmed that she was brutally mistreated, and the offender's genetic material was gathered. But back in 1986, DNA databases didn't exist. The professionals were powerless as they attempted to isolate a DNA profile from a semen sample. There was not much hope, so they put this evidence away, to wait for better technology. It quickly became clear that no other evidence would be uncovered in this confusing case. The investigation was left with just the possibility of a miracle and the determination to solve this difficult mystery. The investigation remained stagnant for a while, frozen in time. The police kept questioning everyone who could have witnessed something. However, no clues revealed a definite solution. After months of waiting, a witness approached the officers with fresh information. He described a man he had seen in a different park. This guy looked like the drawing on the detective's table. That was a crucial moment. Maybe the murderer had switched targets and was now searching for a new prey. The next several months were extremely nerve-wracking. The city was overcome with fear, and each day was a genuine test for the inhabitants. And then, just like the witness had warned, Jennifer disappeared into the park. This was devastating for the city and confirmed the existence of a serial killer. Michaela's murder and Jennifer's disappearance had clear similarities. The girls were around the same age, riding bicycles in parks located in the same neighborhood, only 6 kilometers apart. Investigators and Jennifer's family hoped that it was merely a coincidence and that Jennifer could be found alive. However, as the days passed, their hopes faded. Detectives understood that it was most likely that she remained a victim of the same killer who murdered Michaela. They searched the park thoroughly for her. Despite everyone's efforts, including the police and volunteers, the girl was not found over the following weeks. After Jennifer had been missing for 24 days, her mother decided to repaint the walls in their house to distract herself from the overwhelming and distressing thoughts. Simultaneously, a detective visited her and shared the heartbreaking news that the girl's body had been discovered in the nearby park, not too far from the path she was riding. A man out jogging along the path discovered her when he caught a strong whiff of a decomposing body. He quickly notified the police. The girl's body was concealed under debris and leaves amidst the trees. The police suspect that the perpetrator deliberately arranged the spot beforehand, requiring a considerable amount of time. Her bike was found a few yards away, also camouflaged by branches. Medical professionals found out that strangulation and physical assault led to the victim's death. Although there were no biological traces of the culprit found in the autopsy, this only confirmed the police's suspicion that they were dealing with a serial killer. This occurred even though there was not enough concrete evidence available at the time, and DNA analysis was not yet common. Detectives focused on finding a suspect who could attack at any moment, devoting all their efforts to the task. They searched the archives for previous crimes committed in Tacoma and came across a case from 1970, when a 13-year-old girl vanished. Her body was found 3 months later in the woods, and the investigation revealed that a 29-year-old man named David Fisher, who worked at an animal store, killed her. One day, Fisher mentioned receiving monkeys to train and invited the girl to help. The girl often visited and trusted Fisher over time because she loved animals. One day, Fisher mentioned receiving monkeys to train and invited the girl to help. One day, Fisher mentioned receiving monkeys to train and invited the girl to help. She agreed, and he took advantage of her, ultimately killing her and burying her body in the woods. He got caught and went to jail, but then got sent to a less strict facility for good conduct after 3 years. The place was more like a farm than a prison and didn't even have a fence, so the inmates could almost move around freely. Fisher decided to escape and the police have been unable to find him since. After Michaela and Jennifer were murdered, people speculated that Fisher might have been involved because his tactics and victims closely resembled his previous crimes. Psychologists who had treated Fisher even cautioned that he might kill again. However, 16 years went by and Fisher was never apprehended. Detectives later realized that he may have fled to a far-off location. Police officers investigated everyone who might have been involved and spent hours analyzing thousands of leads. However, the investigation made no progress. A few years later, police decided to check the DNA sample found on Michaela's body against databases. Unfortunately, no match was found. This continued until 2011, when the Tacoma Police Department formed the Unsolved Crimes Unit. The detective in charge searched for staff and discovered Lindsay Wade, a highly accomplished, long-serving police officer. Wade was asked to join the Unsolved Cases Division and she accepted right away. The woman visited the places where the crimes occurred, read every report again, and looked at all the proof. She decided to collect every man connected to the case, no matter how small their involvement. The list contained all the individuals who had seen what happened and those that had been in the park on the day of the murder. It also included people who had shared information with the police or called them, as well as other lawbreakers in Tacoma. Lindsay spent several months on the process and ended up with a list of 200-300 names. However, it was difficult to identify a killer from such a large pool of suspects. Consequently, she opted for a different approach and sent all the evidence back to the lab. In 1986, specialists only examined Jennifer's body because technology at the time couldn't detect tiny evidence. Additionally, DNA analysis wasn't used in investigations back then, so such research appeared pointless. However, things are different now. Specialists chose to study the swimsuit that Jennifer wore on that tragic day. Traces of male semen were discovered on this swimsuit. The specialists obtained a DNA sample and, surprisingly, the outcome did not match the sample retrieved from Michaela. The detectives could not foresee this development. They assumed the same person was responsible for Jennifer and Michaela's murders. The victims' families were also shocked by this revelation, and the detectives were now tasked with the daunting challenge of identifying both murderers. The lab quickly added Jennifer's swimsuit DNA to the database, but there were no matches. This marked the beginning of a new phase in the grim investigation. Nevertheless, Lindsay didn't give up hope. She reached out to one of the top experts in DNA research, Kaylin Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick was a genetic genealogist, and Lindsay requested her assistance with the case. Genetic genealogy entails identifying an individual's DNA based on their relatives, using every available DNA database. With advancements in science, even the most remote familial connections can be uncovered. By getting closer and closer to the owner of the DNA, the specialists might discover several thousand relatives. Then, they must examine each of them and establish familial connections to pinpoint the individual in question. Kaylin took the case and provided a list of possible distant relatives of the owner of the DNA. But that didn't help the detectives much. They investigated the people on the list, but came no closer to catching the killers. The experts were also unable to find any closer relatives of the criminals in the available databases. Lindsay also contacted Parabon, a company known for creating approximate portraits of people based on their DNA. Although the results of their work are not always accurate, they often manage to reflect similar people in the images. The company gave the detective photos of the people with DNA, which were later released to ask for help in finding them. The police got many leads, but they all led nowhere. Lindsay went back to her list of 300 men and tried to remove the ones who seemed less likely to be connected to the murders. With only 160 names left from Lindsay's efforts, she aimed to gather DNA from all of them. However, due to the 30-year gap since the murders, most of these individuals have relocated to diverse places, making this a challenging task. The scientists undertook tedious work and were eventually successful in achieving their goal. It's surprising that all participants willingly agreed to provide their DNA samples. However, the subsequent analysis was delayed for a year due to the police labs being overwhelmed with other cases. Lindsay retired in 2018, but before departing, she sent the final 18 samples to the lab. The investigation was then passed on to a new detective who awaited the outcomes. 25 days later, the new detective called her and told her that the semen found on Jennifer's swimsuit matched the DNA of one of the last 18 people selected from Lindsay's list. The news that 60-year-old Robert Washburn was the killer shocked Lindsay, who was familiar with his name. The police had taken interest in him well before Jennifer's murder because he had passed along information about a man resembling Michaela's killer. This happened 2 months before Jennifer's tragic death, in the same park that Robert showed to the police. As it later emerged, this is also where Jennifer was murdered. The detectives were taken aback by this revelation. They didn't know why Robert would provide this information since he had no connection to Michaela's murder. If it wasn't for this event, the man wouldn't have been in the police reports and no one would have asked for his DNA. It's worth mentioning that Robert gave the sample voluntarily, which helped prove his guilt. Before 1986, Washburn had no criminal record and he lived close to Jennifer's place of residence and work at Boeing afterwards. He got married a few years after the murder, and he and his wife had a daughter who needed constant care due to serious health issues. After his divorce, Robert assumed the full-time care of his daughter and they relocated to a small town in another state. He stopped working to focus solely on her well-being. The discovery of DNA evidence on Jennifer's clothing linked Robert to the crime, resulting in his arrest and extradition to Washington state. Everyone who knew Robert was stunned by the authorities' decision. He was a great father who spent his whole life caring for his daughter. Even his ex-wife confirms he was never violent and remained calm and composed. At the questioning, he was extremely nervous. At the beginning, he didn't know what he was being accused of, and only later asked, "Is it because of the sample I gave a year ago?" "I didn't murder that girl," Robert stated. To the investigators, it appeared as a sign of his guilt, although they already had enough evidence without a confession. As a matter of fact, his DNA matched a sample from the victim's clothes. Robert had a very low chance of winning at trial. However, his immediate denial of guilt, even before he was informed of the reasons for his arrest, revealed a lot. He persisted in his denial, but later on, he accepted a plea bargain. Robert admitted to a horrible crime: he murdered Jennifer. He claims that on that fateful day, he came across Jennifer walking down the road. He then stopped her, pulled her by the arm, and took her to the woods where he killed her and concealed the body. Strangely, he did not admit to assaulting her. At the same time, the DNA discovered on her clothing strongly indicated that he was involved in this terrible tragedy. The January 2019 agreement sentenced him to 26.5 years in jail, with parole optional after 20 years. Due to Robert's age, he may stay imprisoned for life. But the investigation didn't stop there for 3 decades. They thought there was only one murderer of Michaela and Jennifer. But this wasn't the truth. Nevertheless, the detectives were committed to solving Michaela's homicide since the cases were linked. In 2018, investigators asked Parabon for help in using genetic genealogy to investigate a DNA sample. The technology had advanced in recent years. It took several months of hard work to track down the person's family connections. Finally, experts discovered a family that had 2 brothers living in Tacoma when Michaela was murdered. The investigators faced the challenge of obtaining DNA samples from both brothers. They started closely following both brothers, and the elder brother, Gary Hartman, who is 66 years old, became the primary focus. The police followed him to the hospital where he worked as a nurse. Then, he went to a nearby cafe with his colleagues. During lunch, the man wiped his mouth with a napkin several times. The police took the napkin away. The evidence was sent to the lab immediately after the man left. Detectives received the long-awaited result soon after. Hartman's DNA matched the semen found on Michaela's body. Gary was eventually arrested 40 days after Robert's arrest. And 32 years after Michaela's death, just like in Robert's situation, all of his friends and family were stunned. Harry had never committed any crime. He and his third spouse lived a seemingly average domestic life, and appeared to be a rather good person. Despite all the circumstances, Harry maintained his innocence when he found himself in the midst of a criminal case. The trial started in 2022, but ended quickly due to modern DNA testing that proved Harry's guilt. When the prosecutor declared the verdict, Harry couldn't control his emotions. Crying and begging for forgiveness in front of Michaela's family was heard in court, but it didn't prevent the man from receiving punishment. The court emphasized the severity of the crime, and he was sentenced to 26.5 years in prison, just like Robert. At the trial, Gary was 70 years old and needed a walker to move around the courtroom. Two well-known cases that had been linked for 30 years came to a close. People who followed the investigation were troubled by the fact that two killers who had similar handwriting had surfaced in the same neighborhood almost simultaneously. Despite this, both were eventually apprehended, tried, and held responsible for their actions. Share your opinion on this story in the comments.